Hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. And this lecture is all about troubleshooting Lambda access issues. And you may well see some scenarios in the exam where you're asked to troubleshoot and work out what is going wrong in a specific scenario. So in this first scenario, we have a Lambda function and we want our function to be sending logs into CloudWatch logs. And in order to configure this, Lambda requires permission to write to the CloudWatch logs. And this is going to be defined by the Lambda execution role. And if you remember in the lab earlier on in this section of the course, when we created our Lambda function, we created a new execution role, which included basic permissions like permissions to send logs into CloudWatch. And we also added S3 access as well. And it's this execution role which defines the permissions that your Lambda function will have. And it's really similar to an EC2 service role. So in the lab, we created a new execution role, which included basic permissions, like permissions to send logs into CloudWatch. And just remember, the execution role defines the permissions of the Lambda function, whereas the function policy defines the services which can invoke your function. So it's really important to understand the distinction between those two. So another scenario that you might encounter is when you're trying to get Lambda to integrate with another AWS service. And in this scenario, we have a Lambda function and it needs to access data within an RDS database. And the database credentials are held within Secrets Manager. And once again, just like the previous scenario, it's the Lambda function's execution role, which is going to need to include permissions to access secrets held within Secrets Manager. So moving on to another type of scenario that you might see, and this is a really common way of using Lambda. So we have our CloudTrail on the left, logging all the API events within your account. And say, for example, you want CloudTrail to report certain types of events into CloudWatch events. Maybe, for example, if a user creates an unauthorized internet gateway or an unauthorized EC2 instance, then you would definitely want those kind of events to be recorded within CloudWatch events. And you can then have CloudWatch events trigger a Lambda function, which is going to take action on your behalf. So, for example, it might detach or delete the internet gateway, isolate or terminate the unauthorized EC2 instance. Now, in order for CloudWatch to trigger the Lambda function, this is going to need to be configured within the function policy. And this is also something that we saw earlier on in the Lambda lab. So we selected which services we wanted to allow to trigger our function. And we did that using the function policy. So the function policy is definitely something to double check if you are seeing issues with this kind of setup. So moving on to our exam tips, just remember if Lambda cannot perform some action, for example, write to S3, log to CloudWatch, terminate instances, use a customer master key, use Secrets Manager, etc., then double check that the Lambda execution role has the correct permissions. And also remember that some services do have their own resource-based policies, which will also impact who or what can access them. So think S3 bucket policies, key policies, etc. And finally, if CloudWatch events or some other event source cannot invoke a Lambda function, then double check that the function policy allows it. And do remember the difference between the Lambda execution role. So the execution role defines what the Lambda function can do, whereas the function policy defines which services can invoke the function. So that is the end of this lecture. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.